Welcome back to week 9 of the DSR channel. And I wanted to just take a brief sidebar here from the Forgotten Realms Heroes of Faerun book to talk about skill checks quickly. And this is not going to be homebrew. This is going to be rules as written, okay? I know that a lot of DMs, like me too, your default stance on other people's homebrew is nope, right? And I want to empower everyone to leverage skill checks more. They are so much fun. They make your character feel like the thing you built matters so much more. And I want to start with knowledge checks, knowledge skills, which are specifically the ones that I think are used the least, right? Everybody I see online is like, yeah, I never use that. I never call for that. That's a waste. Never choose those. Uh, these ones are awesome. I call for them all the time. They are very impactful in my games and lead to a lot of fun role play and fun for the players. Okay, and so I'm going to do this rules as written, which is kind of a very nebulous topic in fifth edition. Um, and the reason why I want to have this sidebar is because my next video on the factions of from that book, Heroes of Faerun, is going to reference this topic, and I didn't want to put these together into one video because I didn't want to make it so long, right? Like that Feats video was 59 minutes, and when I made that thing public and published it, I was like, man, nobody's going to watch this beast. It's a monstrosity. It's too big. But it's been one of my most popular videos. So thank you all so much for watching it. I hope you found value in it. It seems like a lot of people have. But I'm going to try to make these smaller so you don't have to watch such a big monstrosity. Okay. And like I said, this is the last day of week 9. I ended week 8 at 419 subscribers. Week 9, 774. Awesome. Thank you all so much. Until I became a content creator, I never realized how important this is, right? Just for the sheer motivation of continuing, right? Knowing that people are interested enough that they're like, hey, I'm going to subscribe and watch some more. Has been hugely motivating. So thank you all for sticking with me and supporting me despite my foibles and editing mishaps and like editing noobness. You all are wonderful. Thank you very much. And one last thing. So it's getting harder and harder to keep up with all the comments. YouTube only notifies you when somebody makes a top level comment, but if they reply to anything, like I don't get any notifications. The only way I've been finding those is just like click on the video and scroll through all the comments, seeing if there's any reply to something I've said that I should reply to again. And I've made so many videos, I can't keep up with that anymore. So thank you all for the comments. And frankly, it has been hugely motivating to connect with the community and get all the back and forth discussion and discourse and sharing of ideas. I love it. And maybe this is a dumb thing for a YouTube content creator to say, but if you want to connect and have discussion and discourse and things like that, which I love, and that's actually been an awesome part of this for me, way better than I thought it would be. I've switched the link in the descriptions to be just a direct invite link to my Discord server, so you can just hop on and just let me know, where you're coming from and why you're there. And by where you're coming from, I mean from YouTube, right? Instead of like start playing games or something. And let me know what you're looking for there. And like, let's connect. That'll be awesome. And maybe I'll have less comments on my videos, which will be bad for the algorithm. I don't know. But we'll connect more, and that'll be awesome, which is the stuff I love. I love connecting with people, which is a weird thing for an introvert to say, but I am an introvert. So, but please, if you're one of those very few just mean-spirited people who like just want to say something mean and hurt somebody's feelings, just do that to me. Do not go onto my server and like rant in a public channel, because when I became a YouTube creator, I signed up for that. All of my players and the other people on my server did not. Okay, don't disrespect them. You can disrespect me. That's okay, right? Like that's what you sign up for on the public internet here. Okay, so please just don't disrespect everyone else. Thank you. Okay, so the topic here I want to cover is um, skill checks and how to leverage them more. And I'm going to focus in on the knowledge skills for this video. Otherwise, it would be a very long video. So the topic is related to this concept from fourth edition called skill challenges, which I tried, and I'm not going to go over that because that would take a lot more time, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to really articulate it well anyway. But there's videos on it and articles on it, so you can read it if you want. I tried it several times, and they didn't work well for me. But the skill challenges was this concept in fourth edition of creating like a framework for skills to like use skills more. And while I like the idea of the framework, I found that the framework itself, or at least the way I was executing it, led to these like it was a big disruption to the flow of the game. Like we'd be going along, then something would happen, and I'd be like, oh, okay, now this is a skill challenge, and I'd set up the framework. And sometimes I could get the flow back on track, the role play flow and momentum back on track through the skill challenge. But most of the time I couldn't. And it was just like a interruption. It was like slamming the brakes on role play, which is not good. So what the formula I found instead that I find much more successful is just freaking call for a lot of skill checks, right? Whenever the players are like, do I know? In your head, you should immediately think, boom, how can I make that a skill check? Or can I, boom, how do I make that a skill check, right? It's easier for you to improv as a DM based off of the roll of a die, right? Instead of just being like, I'm just going to make up the result without rolling anything, right? It's like, right? Like role playing is we're all actors in a movie, and the director is not the DM. The director is the dice, right? The dice tell you how to role play that outcome, right? And it actually is really empowering, right? So they try to say, "Do I know something?" You roll a die, but I guess you don't know anything about that. Like you got a nat 1, and with your modifier, it's a 0. You don't, yeah, you don't know jack squat about that thing. Or they roll a nat 20, be like, apparently you read quite a bit about this in your childhood, or last week, whatever, right? Or you at a tavern heard a bunch of stories about this. So you know a lot about this one topic, okay? And I find that that's not disruptive at all because the player said, "Do I know? Can I do?" Right? And your response is just in the moment, roll a die. So it actually helps the role play, and then I encourage the player to role play their response related to that, right? So I'll say, "Well, you apparently don't know nothing." And they'll be like, and then they role play that, like, and it turns into awesome moments, right? Those are some of the best moments of the game. They're like, "Man, I guess I don't know anything." Last week, all right, these players in my non-social encounter, just straight up dungeon crawl, all right. When we we role play always, right? Remember that's one of my mottos: always role play. Uh, was playing a bugbear character, and they ran into some bugbears, and I allow players to get a free roll to see if you recognize what those creatures are, and they rolled a nat 1 and had a -1 on their intelligence modifier, so they got a 0. And I was like, and it was one of the best moments of the whole session because the player was like, I'm a bugbear, but I guess I don't recognize bugbears. And so there was this whole like backstory building moment where they're like, okay, and the whole group got in on it. All the players are like, okay, so you were like orphaned and raised by humans who didn't know what bugbears were either. And so you never were told you were a bugbear. So you don't even know what they are. And you don't know what they look like. You don't realize that you're a bugbear. It turned into an excellent moment, guys. And that was a skill check, a knowledge skill check. Okay. All right. So I want to take us over to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything for some rules as written on knowledge skills. Okay. All right. So Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which was a great book, over here has a section, Dungeon Master's Tools. Okay. And there's this subsection called Parlaying with Monsters. And if you're like me, I had this book for a year before I even read this chapter. Okay. And maybe some of you have never read this chapter, but let's go there because it's got some excellent stuff for us. All right. So you can see this is the section on parlaying with monsters. It could, some high level guidance, but we're going to go to even a subsection there which says this is a table for monster research, and it was relating to parlaying with monsters because in order to know how to parlay with a monster or what their motivations might be, it's setting this up with here's how you know about the monster, okay? And the rest of this section is useful, but this one table and that little paragraph ahead of it, gold. All right. I stumbled upon this and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I use this all the time. So rules is written. Here's where we're going to go. Okay. Yeah. All right. So first up, it sets up the DC, right? It tells you what the DC should be. And this is an easy DC calculation to work with because it's just 10 plus the creature's CR rating or challenge rating, right? That's the DC for all of these. So the more powerful the creature is, the less likely people are to run into it, I guess, right? Makes sense. And therefore, the less is known about this creature. Now, you might, and I do this sometimes, if it's a really like famous creature type, like dragons, right? Dragons is in the name of the game. Everybody has stories about dragons. You're very likely to hear myths about dragons. Several real world cultures and religions involve dragons. So in the game, it makes sense that people, even though it's a super powerful creature and has high CR rating, that people would share a lot of stories about dragons and create a lot of stories about dragons. So maybe you lower the DC in those kinds of instances. All right, that's up to you as a DM. But the base is just 10 plus the CR. All right, super simple. All right, now the relevant skill is in this table. So if it's an aberration, roll Arcana. If it's a beast, animal handling, nature, or survival. Okay, celestial, Arcana, or religion. This is gold. All right, this is the sweetness because two things. One, not only do you now have a way to make knowledge skills relevant in the game in a very easy way, it also does something that I didn't realize was going to be so as powerful when I first started doing this, which was the ors, right? The fact that you can, for beasts, do something like animal handling, nature, or survival. And I leverage that heavily now. So whenever I call for a skill check, not only is the first, or when the player says, can I or do I know, not only is the first thing I think of, can I make this a skill check? The second thing I think of is, how can I make this multiple skills? And I always give the player, if at all possible, a choice of multiple skills. Always, if possible, right? Some things I just can't. Uh, but most of the time, I say, hey, you can try this or this. You choose. This or this, you choose. And that was just a little more likely that their character is going to have the relevant skill and feel like, and the player's going to have this moment of, oh, sweet, that thing that's on my character sheet mattered and was valuable and had value in the game. Okay. Um, so definitely do that. It helps a lot. All right. And I am not a fan of like nebulous advice. I like very, very concrete advice, practical steps that are easy to replicate. Okay. So let's walk through how, 3 different ways, 4 different ways that I use these. And these are still rules as written. Okay. And this is the part that where I wish they had done more in the Dungeon Master's guides to help us with this, because basically the Dungeon Master's guides, when it comes down to running skill checks, is basically negotiate with your players, right? Let your players negotiate with you is generally the advice. Let your player ask. They're supposed to be the ones, according to the source books, the core rule books. They should initiate the skill check by saying, "Can I use this? Can I do this? Can I do that?" And if they don't know enough, what I find, not just if they, all of us didn't know enough, right? All of us are like, I don't know when I can call for that. I haven't seen it modeled for me. And so I don't know that I can do this. The one thing that was modeled heavily was insight checks from Critical Role. So now, whenever they're having a social encounter with anybody and that person says anything, everybody's like, insight check. Okay, great. But let's model all the others, okay? Because that's how they get used. And DMs, you can initiate this too, right? So when a player just says, "Do I know something?" or "Can I try something?" you can also initiate, "Oh, well, roll this or do that." Okay. So, so this is still raw because it's just within the spectrum of DM ruling, right? The rules say you decide whenever to call for a check. So it's basically wide open. So it's just DM ruling. So we're going to leverage that DM ruling, say rules is written when the party first encounters some non-standard humanoids or standard humanoids, right? Give them a free knowledge skill check that's relevant, right? And you can use that table from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to come up with what is the relevant knowledge check, right? If it's giants, use the history check. If it's dragons, you can use Arcana, history, or nature. If it's a regular humanoid, use history and allow them, and they're not trying to identify are they a humanoid, they're trying to identify, right, what their subspecies is or what their culture is, right? Are they a human from Chult? Are they a human from Tethir? Are they a human from Maybe you can identify their culture, and that would be based off of like not just the way they look, right? That would be profiling. You're also doing it based off of their accent, the word choices they use, and it would be relevant to their dialect, even though, if you're like most DMs, and I'm included, you're not a good enough actor to replicate a bunch of different accents, and you don't know enough lore right off the top of your head for every single culture in D&D. You can just rattle that off your head. But you can simulate it by just saying, well, you talk with them for 5 minutes and roll this check, and you realize they're from which tells you this kind of information about them, right? It's easy to simulate. You don't have to be a professional actor. None of us are, okay? Okay, so when you first encounter them, give them a free knowledge skill check. And what I mean by free is if combat is starting, don't make it an action. Just say, everybody roll a knowledge skill check right now. And you tell them it can be history or this, give them their 1 or 2 or 3 options from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything table. And then based on the results, okay, the formula, right? DC is 10 plus CR. Very easy formula. And the results are, if they fail by 5 or less, this is a great opportunity to use degrees of failure or degrees of success. This is what I do. And this is also recommended. Using degrees of success is recommended in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It just doesn't give you any more guidance than that. It just says you can do degrees of success. So we're still raw here. We're still doing rules as written, but I'm going to give you a little more strict guidance just to help you get started, right? Once you get comfortable doing it like this, flex your wings and do it however you like. This is just to help you get started if you don't have a better idea. That's all, okay? So if you fail by 5 or less, give them the creature subtype, okay? And I'll give a little more explanation of what I mean by creature subtype. All right, a quick edit there to fix the screen. And if you succeed by 5 or less, then you give them the whole stat block name, the creature type, and the CR. And I'll explain that with a stat block in a sec. And finally, if they succeed by 6 or more, just give them the whole description text for this stat block, okay? And a final real quick note with the calculating the DC, if the monster CR is 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, just count that as 0, right? That would still be DC 10, right? It doesn't go to DC 11 until they're CR 1. Super easy, okay? All right, so let's look at a stat block example and what I mean by these things. So first up, the easiest one is getting the creature subtype, okay? And by subtype, I mean something like Slod. Or if they're a goblin, just tell them goblin. If they're a goblinoid, right? Hobgoblin, bugbear, goblin. I think those are the goblinoids. Just tell them that. If it's some kind of orc, just tell them that. And that's actually less information than if you gave them the creature's actual creature type, which is why I put that as a lower CR. And it would be fairly easy, right? They look at them, and most characters would know that's an orc, okay? And if they roll higher, then you give them the creature type, which is in this case aberration, right? Which gives them actually a lot more information than the subtype. So, and you give them the stat block name. That one's, if you feel like it, sometimes that's a little too much information, but maybe make that a higher CR, whatever works for you in your games. That's what I do. I give them the whole stat block name. I say, you happen to know enough about slods that you know this one is a gray slod, right? And since this is a CR 9, this would be a DC 19 check. So they had to make it at least a DC 19 check, knowledge check. And with aberrations, that would be Arcana, right? Bring in Arcana into the game that they had to make. So, and then they know their challenge rating, which would be CR9. And with the challenge rating, I try to flavor it a little bit in the way of, I don't just say CR9, I say, you know how dangerous these things are relative to your capabilities. You know that they're capable of this, and they, have nasty claws. And they do, I kind of look at the stat block and say, they can cast a few spells, and they're known to do this, and that. I won't list the spells. I won't tell them exactly what kind of damage types they're doing. I'll just kind of reference that and then end with, and to you, that translates to CR9. So you know how powerful they are relative to you. You're level 9, they're CR9, you're probably okay. Or you're level 4, they're CR9, you should tread carefully. Do not start combat with this thing, right? You're trying to give them that information, but only if they roll high enough. And finally, the description. That's the whole block of text at the bottom, right? Just give them that. If they roll really high, which is they roll 6 or they beat the DC by 6 or more, give them the whole block of text. Now, a little sidebar on this one, which I'm trying not to do, but the sidebar is don't read this whole thing to them. That's because it can be a lot of text. Maybe read a highlight and then paste this into whatever you're using for the game chat channel, right? I play in Discord, and while I'm doing live play, I'll also have the game chat going. And I put information like this in there. I'll put images in there of the monsters they're fighting. When there's a room description, I'll put the number of the room. I label all the rooms and let them see the room number on the map. I let them see that. And then I put the description, which I usually will read out loud, but I'll also copy that room description with the room number into the Discord chat. So they have this nice log that they can refer back to. And I started it because I was like, well, maybe people are more like me where I have audio processing disorder, which is basically like dyslexia, but for hearing. So if there's too much talking going on, I can't understand. And I found this was a good way to kind of like, whichever way somebody learns, this is helpful, right? If it's easier for you to read it visually, the text, great. Here it is visually. If you are, I don't know, maybe you're dyslexic and it's easier for you to hear it, great. Give them a little bit of that and let them have this text and refer back to it as they need to, instead of just making them try to remember like what was room 3, what was in room 3 and what was in room 5. They've got all of that text right in the Discord chat. Okay, so I would put this in there. Now, if you have a player who has let you know that they are dyslexic and this will be a struggle for them, definitely read the highlights out loud for them, or read the whole thing out loud. That's okay too. You just want to be careful of too much exposition for your players, because a lot of players will tune out if it's just you reading something for 5 minutes. All right. So try to find a balance that works for your players and your table. And by the way, Don't just say, is anyone dyslexic? Right? That's a session 0 topic, and say, hey, everybody, let me know if there's anything I can do to accommodate your needs here, right? You've already talked safety tools. Now you're talking like, is there anything else I should know, right? Right. And you can offer up, hey, here's some things I struggle with. So that might be an example. Like I have audio processing disorder. Do you have that too? Let me know and I can try to accommodate that. And then people be like, oh, well, I'm dyslexic and I'm this and right, great. Let's get that all out there. And then you as a DM can accommodate them at least better, right? And you should try to, okay? It's all about people having fun together. Moving on. All right. Second way you can make this knowledge skills relevant is by having the players or allowing the players to take the study action during combat. Now, to make this one effective, you also simultaneously have to not allow free study action checks for a lot more free information, right? The free roll only gives that high level information. Maybe you recall the description, but you're not getting any specifics about their stat block other than like those things I mentioned, right? It's just high level stuff. And if they were to try to say like, can I, sometimes players will ask, can I get like a free skill check here? Well, no, you spent your action attacking. Okay. You have to take the study action, which most of the time takes your action, like your full action. Now, there are a few ways to get it as a bonus action, right? The Keen Mind feat, which, by the way, is completely worthless if you don't enforce this, right? If you enforce this, then all of a sudden Keen Mind is very powerful. Okay. And like one of the rogues, right? Inquisitive can take the study action. I think it's the Inquisitive or the Mastermind. One of those two could take the study action as a bonus action as well. So there's a few ways to do that. There's probably a few other ways I'm forgetting. But yes. And then if they're going to spend their turn or action or some of their action economy trying to study, give them good stuff. Okay. So we're going to use the same DC calculation, right? 10 plus your CR. And we're going to use a similar kind of formula, which is fail by 5 or less. If they failed, but 5 or less, let them ask a yes or no question, and your answer will literally be only yes or no. So they'll have to ask you, do they do lightning damage? And you can say yes or no. Or are they resistant to lightning damage? Yes or no. But it has to be a yes or no question. So they've got to be very specific, and they only get a very specific piece of information. If they're like, what kind of damages do they do? You just say, that wasn't yes or no. You fail. You don't get that info. Okay, if they succeed by 5 or more, give them a one-word answer. So they could ask, like, tell me one of their resistances. Okay, I'll list one of them for you. And they're resistant to fire. Or if they're resistant to none, you say none. Okay, one-word answer. If they succeed by 6 or more, which should just, I don't know, I said 6 to 10. 6 or more, give them a whole sentence, right? Give them a little more juicy stuff. And that can feel a little bit like metagaming, but it's not, right? Or I encourage you not to think of it that way, because this is them spending action economy to gain information, right? And then they're making an ability check, a skill check, which means they could fail and get nothing. So there's a risk and reward, just like if they're trying to attack, right? They're trying to attack, risk and reward. Maybe it works, maybe I do damage, maybe I get nothing. Same kind of thing here. So they are taking a risk to do this. So if they do really well, like a crit, this is like a crit, you beat the DC by 10, give them a whole sentence answer. So they can ask more complex questions, give them like a whole sentence. You can have to be the arbiter is like, hey, is that too much? They're like, tell me every resistance they have. Tell me, give me the copy paste their whole attack information. No, that's too much, right? But give them an answer, give them a sentence answer like, okay, well, their claw attack, yeah, has a pretty good chance to hit you, and yes, deals a fair amount of damage. So that's a good way to make these things meaningful in combat. I'm sorry, everybody. I thought this was going to be in my head, this was going to be like a 5-minute quick video, and it's already gotten long. Number 3, and I've referenced this one a few times. When a player says, do I know, can I jump that? Can I try this? Can I do that? Boom, first thing you should be thinking of is, how do I make this a check, right? So, and with knowledge checks, it's going to come down to, do I know, right? Do I know anything about this? Do I happen to know what that flag symbol means? Do I happen to know what that, anytime they say, do I know? Boom, skill check, okay? All right, so a good like gauge for the DCs you should set this as is, if it's like common knowledge, like almost everybody knows this kind of thing, DC 10. Like if it's even, you can go even lower. If like even the village of 100 people who live out in the middle of the wilderness, even they know this, DC 5, right? If it's uncommon knowledge, like maybe not everybody knows this, but like half the population of Waterdeep knows this, DC 12. If it's rare information, DC 15. And if it's very rare information, DC 18. And that's a good gauge. Just work with that. You can adjust it as you see fit. And if it's like really important to your campaign, maybe raise the DC, right? If it would give too much away, raise the DC even more. If it's an important secret in your campaign world or the adventure you're running. But generally, you want to be give information away to players often, right? You want them to know this stuff anyway, so don't gate it too high. And the way I would run, by the way, a lot of these checks is I would run them as have the whole group roll in all of these scenarios, and probably except when it's in combat, right? In combat, only that one player rolls. But out of whether it's the free check before combat or any other situation, have the whole group roll. It's a good way to get everybody re-engaged. Have the whole group roll, and since we want to give this information away anyway, all my players, close your ears real quick. Just let the highest player, the one who rolled the highest, just make that be the roll that you go off of. Like if anybody rolls an 18, give them the information. Okay. In a lot of other scenarios, I recommend a group check, so half the party has to or more has to succeed. But in kind of knowledge information, especially knowledge that I want to give away anyway, I want them to have. Like I wanted them to have it anyway. I would have told them for free, but by making it basing it off of a skill check, it now feels more meaningful to them, especially because their character sheet means more to them, right? And that translates to they're having more fun and they're more engaged. And number 4, the last one, puzzles and mysteries. So puzzles and mysteries are fun, they're similar and they're trying to figure things out. So give clues, right, to help them along, because it's when you're the one who's constructed the puzzle or mystery, or you've read the text and you know how to run it, in your mind, this feels super simple and easy, right? Like a 5th grader could figure this out. When you're on the other side of the table, you're the player, it is a lot harder. Largely, I believe, because it's theater of mind. Even if you have a map, there's still a lot of theater of mind to this, and we can't see as players the knowledge that you have as a DM, right? You in your head have seen the whole thing, or if you created the puzzle or mystery, you envision the thing in your mind, right? Players can't envision that. They only know what you tell them and show them with your descriptions. So yeah, give away some free information, help them out so that they don't just get bored, like I can't figure it out and I give up and I'm checked out now, right? So when they kind of get, either they stop asking questions because they're stuck, or if they ask, can I get a clue? Be like, yes. And insight is a great one to use for clues. Investigation is a great one to use for clues, and then all of the knowledge skills too, right? So when they ask for a clue, if you can't think of a specific knowledge skill that's relevant, like in this case, it's clearly Arcana because they're trying to figure out this like magical glowing crystal. Okay, Arcana check. If they're trying to figure out, if they're trying to there's like a numerical cipher that they have to solve, that's easily an investigation check. But if they just want like a general clue, or in the moments when players are stuck, which will happen frequently, right? Just call for insight or investigation. Hey guys, everybody give me an insight or investigation. And if anyone succeeds the DC that you had in your mind, give them a clue. Give them a hint about what's going on. Okay, well, you figured out that the cipher is based off of a shift of the letters of the alphabet. Give them a clue. And insight is relevant here. You might be thinking like, insight doesn't make sense. That's only for detecting lies. No, insight is not for just detecting lies. You can use insight to tell about a person's personality, identity, bonds, goals, all of those attributes of personality. And I would give people information about alignment if they roll insight high enough. Tell them the other person's alignment, because that's a high level descriptor of their personality. Okay. Insight kind of represents your subconscious mind, which is part of your brain, right? That's why when you say like, oh, I have a gut feel about something, it's not that your gut had any feeling. It's that your subconscious mind did a billion calculations and then surfaced that information up with this general sense of not good, or that's good, or you should stay away from that, or a gut feeling. But really, it was your subconscious mind doing a lot of calculations on your behalf. So that's insight. All right. So if they're stuck, their insight could be like, you should maybe look at this piece closer, try this. All right. So use those ones. All right. That is my suggestions on how to make knowledge skill checks more relevant using raw rules as written. So you can suggest these to your DM. Okay. And don't be a jerk when you bring these up to your DM. Don't be like, well, Bruce on DSR channel said this, or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything says this. Be like, hey, can I use this skill at this time in this way? And if they're like, well, sure, great, off you go. And if they're like, well, why do you think you can use that? Be like, then just tell them, well, there's this table in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that says like these are the skills that might tell me information about these things. And seems like for free when you first just see a creature, I might recognize it. So can I at least roll this to see if I recognize what kind of subtype it is? Right? Be cool with your DM, and if they give you a ruling like, well, not this time, maybe let's talk about it after session. Be cool. Be like, okay, all right, you're the DM because this is your friend, right? Who is sacrificing a lot of time to run the game world for you. So be cool with them. Don't be a jerk. And DMs, be cool with your players. If players are like, hey, can I use this knowledge check to learn this things? Be like, hallelujah, we're going to use a knowledge skill. Yes. All right, so everybody be cool with each other. That's what this game is about. All right, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.